Welcome to Empowering the Next Generation podcast. I am Helen Verroux. This podcast is dedicated to help anyone connected to preteens and teens to give them tools, empower and inspire teachers, high school senior leaders, and parents to build the future leaders of tomorrow. We discuss about controversial and relevant topics related to the world of education, the main problems you are facing, and solutions to help you navigate your journey. We want to make a positive change in education by bringing on experts that will give you a different perspective on how you can solve the hardship you are facing today. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Empowering the Next Generation podcast with me, Coach Helen. I am so glad that you're tuning in to this new episode. We have an amazing guest speaker. You know that in Empowering the Next Generation, we are here to give you tools on how to ignite 360, the community, develop leaders, and also create meaningful connections. We want to give you tools to expand your mind and also to allow your community to grow and to flourish. So today we have, as I said before, an amazing guest speaker. His name is Ben Hobbis. He is the founder of the Step Up Network, which is a network for aspiring and new education leaders after his own experience of getting into leadership. So the network was named as one of the top 100 social enterprises in 2024 in its first year of operation. And Ben was named as the Education Leader of the Year at the Leadership Awards 2025 in the Midlands for his work on Step Up and his work in his day job. He is also a primary school teacher and a coach in his community. So welcome on board, Ben. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me, Helen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and I know we are going to talk today about building your nonprofit organization. You've been in retail management for years, and I'm really impressed by what you have accomplished all these years because I know it's a different field. So just share with us the transition between really being a retail manager and going into education and creating your nonprofit organization.
Yeah, I think you do get a lot of transferable skills regardless of any organization you work in or any sector. And I think it's really interesting moving from one to the other. I think one of the things that I learned a lot about being a teacher from being in retail was I spent actually more time in retail in management positions than I did in non-management positions, and worked in some convenience stores, but also worked for large supermarkets. And a lot of the roles I had involved looking after the store for a period of time in the day, usually called like a duty manager. And I think when I did that role in a supermarket, it was very similar to being a teacher because it was like you were ultimately responsible for the store during that time. But like when something you would often carry a phone with you and be called by like different departments about this is happening over here, I need help with this and here. And I think it's a bit like in the teacher being in the classroom, you're very much like, right, who needs me first? How am I prioritizing? How am I managing my workload here? What actually needs doing, what can I leave, what can wait till next week. And I think that's what being in retail really helped. Whereas I think a lot of people, it's something that I think for a lot of trainee teachers and early career teachers can overwhelm them a lot when you're the only adult in the room and you're the one making that decision. And I think very similar, it felt very similar to me in terms of that from being a teacher point of view. But also I think I learned a lot in terms of becoming a leader in education. I think because of that I was quite fortunate I became a leader quite early on in my teaching career. And actually the skills that I'd learned, particularly around leading and managing people, I've been able to bring into that sector, which I think if you go straight into teaching, for example, and haven't had that experience, and like most people do, and most people do, are really successful and learn those things along the way. I think it's helped accelerate that growth, and also that's for me to be successful as a leader, but also to enable others to be successful as well, and sort of pass on those transferable skills and that knowledge as well.
I love it. I was really interested in knowing a bit more about the haha moments because retail management is totally different from education. So what was your haha moment was that really encouraged you to stop retailing and just being like, I want to go in education. I feel this is what I'm called to. So what was that haha moment?
I think for me, it was that ultimately, by being a retail manager, who was I benefiting? You know, I was making more money for a company, and that was the main thing. You know, when you're working in retail, it is very quite interesting with schools, very data driven. So it's very much, you know, how much money is your store taking a week? You know, how much loss have you got? How much profit have you made? How much waste has your store got? How many sickness hours have you got? You know, it was very much, and it was all about competition. I remember the the convenience retail I worked in, every week there was a new like dashboard for our area manager. We'd have all the stores on, there'd be about 20 stores, and you'd all be ranked against one another. And it just felt like it was competition. Now, probably am a little bit competitive, but I'm not the most competitive of people. And I think a bit of competition is good. But
Mm,
it was like, I was like thinking, well, what's my purpose here? You know, like
mm,
what am I doing? All I'm doing at the moment is making, my view is I'm making more money for a big company. And I think my moral compass and sort of what I was being driven by wasn't that. I was being driven by that actually I would want any customer to walk into this store and have a really good experience and want them to be able to get the products they want, have really good customer service. If there was a problem, we would deal with it. And that was my moral compass. And I think a lot of that started because the first store I worked in was in my local town, the town where I grew up. I used to walk into that store as a kid after primary school with my mum and with my brother and buy things and actually remember that. And I think then actually that was my driving force as I moved through my career, that actually every store I wanted it to be the best it could be because I wanted to be the best person I could be, the best employee I could be, the best leader I could be. But I realized actually when I was in my early like late teens, early 20s, I was like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Do I want to be in a retail store? You know, would and not necessarily store, but in retail, do I want to go? And I did have a bit of toying with some decisions. Did I want to go and work, say, like a head office type role? Did I just want to climb the ladder and progress through the ranks? And then because I got experience in convenience and supermarket, they're very different. Did I want more, go back into convenience, stay in supermarkets? I did toy with the big thing that I thought about was HR management, so human resources management. I did do a HR qualification whilst in retail. And it was, I was actually working with someone who was doing a 3-year primary education degree at university. So she's doing her teacher training over a 3-year period. And she'd worked alongside me for a while. And she said, Ben, the big difference I noticed with you compared to the other managers in the team here is you're actually really good with people. And actually, a lot of the other managers aren't. A lot of the other managers are probably more knowledgeable than you and more experienced than you in retail. But you actually, she goes, you're really good at explaining things. You're really good at showing people how to do things. So in that store in particular, I was responsible for all things to do with HR. So I did like rota, staffing, recruitment, induction training, and so on, as well as other responsibilities. And she said, you know, I think you'd be a really good teacher. And I'd sort of toyed with the idea of it. I hadn't been to university at this point, so I'd done A levels and then sort of worked full time. She goes, I think you'd be a really good teacher. And she goes, I think, why don't you? Because I'd had a chat with her, like, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do, and with life and sort of where I want to go. And she said, why don't you just arrange some work experience in school? She goes, what have you got to lose? If you hate it, then you just don't go back. If you love it,
mm,
then you do, kind of thing.
mm.
And I went in and I went to my old primary school and I absolutely loved it. And she probably doesn't realize I talk about it a lot, the storyline. She probably doesn't
Sorry.
realize the impact that she's had on that. But I think that was my sort of aha moment, like actually that conversation with her, the sort of thinking about what did I want to do. And I think the reason why I took a year out after I did my A levels and worked full time as a retail manager. And I remember one of my old teachers coming into the store and saying, sometimes I think because of the way the education system works in England and you're doing exam after exam, coursework after coursework, and actually sometimes you just need a break because
Mm.
actually and most people do go on to university straight after A levels, but sometimes you do just need a break when you've worked that hard and actually you've just been plugging qualification, qualification, qualification. We don't necessarily always think about what do we ultimately want to do.
Yes,
And
and I feel it's really important that you share your story because anyone that might be listening to us right now, they might be in the same position. They've been doing something else and then they've just transitioned into education. And I love how you found someone in your journey that could actually see the potential in you and could see that you could offer something different. So
Mhm.
along the way, you became a qualified teacher, then you
Yeah.
became a primary school teacher as well. So why
Mhm.
primary school? And now you are coaching your school as well. So two questions.
Yeah, so for me, I'm someone who gets bored easily. So I think that was the big thing I found when I worked in a supermarket, thinking back to the retail idea. When I worked in a supermarket, you often did a more specialist role, and in as convenience, you were a generalist. So you would often be moved around departments. So my experience when I was in retail was all like sort of customer service and checkout management, people management, rather than things like looking at shop floor and things like that. Whereas when I worked in convenience, I really enjoyed the really varied nature. Each and every day was really, really different. And I think you could probably liken that to a primary school and a secondary school. So I was like thinking, well, could become a secondary teacher, wasn't sure what subject, or I was like, I looked at primary and thought, you know what? You get a range of opportunities to teach, you get a range of opportunities to lead as well in a school. Um, and I was like, I think that's what I'd like to do. I'd like the variety. And I'm not saying secondary school teaching is boring by any means, but I thought, well, could I comfortably deliver if I was say a history teacher? Because history is one of my favourite subjects at school. If I had 3 year 7 classes and I had to deliver the same lesson 3 times a week
Mm.
for how many weeks in a school year, would I get as much joy out of it? And I probably didn't think I did. So that's why I became a primary school teacher. And I initially started working in quite small primary schools. So I started off as an unqualified teacher at in during the COVID pandemic is when I qualified. So a really interesting time to qualify. So I haven't been teaching very long. Worked in one school for 2.5 years. Um, but it was a one form entry school, so there was only one class in each year group. And I loved the sense of community, but found the workload really hard and found it really hard to develop as a teacher and become a really good teacher whilst planning every subject. So I moved mid-year to a three form entry school, where I still work. So I've just been there just over 2 years now, and have taught as a qualified teacher. I've taught year 3 and year 5. But I also did when I first moved to my current school. I started teaching year 6 in the mornings and then did PPA and release cover in the afternoon. So taught from reception to year 6. So that was really useful. In terms of the
And
coaching, oh, sorry.
yeah. Yeah. So the coaching, yeah.
Yeah.
Share a
So in
little
terms
bit
of the
about.
coaching part, I'm not a qualified coach per se, but one thing I'm really interested in is professional development. So as I said, like I'm a real people person, had done HR qualifications. And the way I started my journey with coaching was having instructional coaching in school when I first became an ECT. So using walkthroughs as a tool and having instructional coaching with my mentor. And that eventually fizzled out. And I remember feeling that I became a much better teacher much quicker when I had that instructional coaching. And I became curriculum lead in my current school. And my school have got a lot of experienced teachers, so a lot of teachers who've been there. I think our average time period is probably like 8 years or more,
Okay.
or 8 years of being a qualified teacher, not necessarily 8 years there. And we were looking at, well, what development can we give people who want to be teachers and actually want to stay as teachers? They don't want to move on and become SLT and come out of the classroom. They want to stay in the classroom. And you can do that. The school we've done that a lot through facilitating extra responsibilities like subject leadership or student teacher mentoring. But actually, for pure teacher development, what could we have? So my role as curriculum lead then sort of expanded, became curriculum coaching lead, and we're only in the first year of it. We've begun a program of instructional coaching, not instructional coaching as it says on the tin, as strict as it say. We call it more like teacher coaching because it isn't
Okay.
as intense, well, intense is probably the wrong word, as frequent as instructional coaching. So this year we've been very much playing with it. I have coaching myself. I pay for coaching outside of my day job. And I've had coaching for the past 3 years. And I would say coaching has probably been one of the most beneficial developmental points of my life, I would say.
I I totally agree with you. And I feel this is what needs to be done in schools. I feel there is a lack of coaching in schools, especially for teachers, and now even for parents. There is no coaching for parents. There is no coaching for students really to grow into becoming better leaders. I feel there is so much more that we can do, and I love that you transitioned because obviously you became the educational leader of the year. You got an awards. You are in the peak of your purpose. I feel this is purpose because you are recognized for what you're doing. Now you are being fulfilled. You feel that you are adding value to the field of education, to the people around you. So let's dive into more what your non-profit organization Step Up. Why you wanted to do Step Up, the Step Up network, and what did you feel was the missing tool in education so you could actually do your non-profit organizations?
Really good question, and I think it's the one I talk about a lot. So going back to when my experience of working in the first school I worked in, which I said was quite a small school, and thinking back to retail, I got a lot of opportunities to lead really early on, and because I'd been an unqualified teacher in the school first, so it's about a year after I'd been in school, I was asked to take on some responsibility. And for context, that school had a lot of staff within their early career. And I was sort of the first teacher who'd really taken on extra responsibilities beyond the members of our senior leadership team. And originally it started as just, can you take on the school council? And I, in my Ben way, looked at personal development element of Ofsted framework and realised actually our personal development is not good enough, and went away and I think we need to think beyond our school council and think about personal development as a whole. Wrote a proposal for my head teacher and ended up becoming then personal development lead as for the whole strand, and really moved the school forward in quite a rapid way. Really enjoyed it and loved seeing the impact that I was having beyond my classroom, because I think at that time I had quite a difficult year teaching that year. So I think the leadership side was the thing that kept me in because I was felt really successful. And then because I'd done that, my head teacher said, could you look at history as well as a subject? Because history was the subject. We're in the Ofsted window, and it was when Ofsted was still doing deep dives, and we were like, we want history to be deep dived, and we think with the impact you've had on personal development, could you look at history as well? Which later then became the whole of the humanities subjects, so became history, geography, and beyond. I also became a DSL during that time. So for people not sure, that was a designated safeguarding lead. So I was a deputy DSL, and that was because we had quite a high safeguarding load in the school. And because I was personal development lead, took that link between PSHE and safeguarding. And I took on more and more responsibility, and I was enjoying it and realizing it had an impact. And I think more so when I took on more curriculum aspects, because I was seeing impact directly in the classroom as well, and was used to feeding back to teachers, observing lessons, and so on. But I found it near enough then impossible to be a really good teacher and a really good leader. And I thought, do I need to decide whether I give up the leadership stuff and just focus on being a really good teacher, or actually look at moving out of the classroom, but I was still really early in my career, and going into a leadership role? And I thought, but I came into teaching to teach. I also, as I said, really interested in the curriculum aspect side of the school, teaching and learning. I thought if I want to be the best leader I can be, and if I'm going to go in and watch other teachers teach, I need to be the best teacher I can be, or I believe I need to be. And I don't remember quite how I did this, but then I reached out to other people on social media who said, that's me, that's my story, or people who'd actually were a bit further in that journey and said, I've left the classroom to become a senior leader, but I really miss being in the classroom, or equally people who'd done it the other way around, or people who'd left schools or education as a whole because they felt they couldn't meet their purpose, the purpose that they wanted to serve. And particularly, a lot of people were in that sort of middle leader, senior leader level. And I just thought, what about if there was a space where people could connect? So we started by just setting up a Twitter account. And we said, what about if we got some like educators together, some experienced educators, educational leaders who could share journeys, tips, tricks, to really support when you want to take that step up. And it's all about the Step Up Network was all about built on the idea of choice, and having the choice to want to lead, the choice to teach, whichever path your career takes. And that's where it came from. And then since then, as part of that as well, but part of that launch, we did we set up a really simple Google form. Who are you? what barriers have you got at the moment in terms of your journey, and what would you want from an organization? And then in the last 2 years, we used that information that we collected as the basis of everything that we do. Um, and then it's sort of gone from there, really. And then we've done so much more since, which I'm sure I could spend ages talking about. I'm sure you'll ask me specific questions on certain
Yes,
areas.
yes. I love how you actually this is phenomenal what you do already. You are very multifaceted. You have the gift of just, I feel, working under pressure. You already have all the skills inside of you. And the more we give you, the more you just work with it. There are people like that. They are very talented. And you just need to use their gifts to really allow them to flourish. And I feel that the more people give you responsibilities and duties, you will ace at it because you just love growth, you love development, you love to be challenged. And I love that you actually started your nonprofit organization really to bring aspiring leaders together and leaders in education so they can actually network and you can help them to forward their journey into growth and personal development. You've done different webinars, you've done different face-to-face events. You do as well online events. You do so many events around the UK. But now the question I want to ask you is, I want you to give me 5 steps, okay? The 5 different steps that anyone who wants to actually do to build their own nonprofit organization, what would you tell them? What are the 5 steps that they need to focus on?
Yeah, I think the first step is you need to be really clear on the purpose and the why behind the organization. So, the silence in it start with why. It's quoted a lot, isn't it? And I think that is really key, because actually, if you're just building another organization which is a duplicate of what else is out there, actually you're not going to be successful. So I think you need to have a really strong why, a really strong vision, really strong set of values that you build your organization on. I think the second thing then is to really have a plan and a process. So at Step Up, we work really hard. It's a volunteer-led organization. Behind the scenes, the things that we pull our hair out is because we had a plan in terms of what we wanted to do. We didn't necessarily have a plan of how we're going to get there, so like the processes. So we're spending a lot of time at the moment behind the scenes working on things like policies, planning processes. So I'd say step two is to have a plan. The third step is to not do it all yourself, is get a team around you. And I think the way you do that
How
is up
did
to
you
you.
find your team? How did you find your team?
We reached out, so two elements of it. We mainly reached out through using social media, and there we got people who were educators to come forward. But we realised as educators, we don't necessarily have all the skills that are needed to run an organisation like this. So we also used an organisation called Reach Volunteering. So Reach Volunteering is a charity who help find specialist volunteers for organizations like not-for-profits and things like that. They help with things like school governors and trusteeships as well, but they're free to sign up to. And all of the people who are on their platform have got 3 years or more experience within a given field. So our team is sort of 50% people in education and 50% people who are non-educators. And that works really well because you get a really different perspective. And I remember when I first set it, one of the first roles I actually hired for as a volunteer was someone who'd got HR background who could help with like volunteer recruitment. Now, volunteer management is not easy. We've had to have many difficult conversations with volunteers about time and commitment. And I think, again, linking to that sort of second step about the planning and process is thinking about that volunteer management set piece is, are
Okay.
you going to have like more like a volunteer contract or agreement, a handbook? Some organizations more have like a committee that they have for a year, and then at the end at the end of that they re-elect a committee, or you sort of put yourself forward. We sort of don't do that because we wanted sort of that longevity. So we do have some people who've been with us from the very start, the founding team. We then have some people who've only just started working with us. But I think it's that awareness of what you can bring, but also what you should be
Okay.
spending your time and energy on. And so, I mean, in
And
some cases, if you're a not-for-profit organisation, you might actually not be looking at volunteers. You might more so be looking at paid. So freelancers, we use a freelancer to help when we're really busy, and she's great,
mm,
and things like that. I'd say the fourth thing is really
the
being
fifth,
aware
yeah, the
that
fourth, yeah.
yeah, the fourth thing, it's really hard to manage a small budget and manage small income. So we were very lucky in our first year that we had a lot of sponsorship and grants. And we were able to get them because at first we were an unregistered organisation, which you can be, and then we became a registered organisation. Because we was an unregistered organisation, we were able to access certain things. Equally, there were things we couldn't get access to because we weren't registered. So, for example, in the UK, if you want national lottery funding, you have to be a registered organisation. Depending on the type of organisation you are, depends on the type of funding is available to you.
Mm,
And I think it's really hard managing the small budget. I've gone from retail when you're managing, like you've got
yeah.
six-figure sum or even more coming in every week into a store,
Wow.
and then actually you're going to managing, a four-figure sum that has got to last you an entire year. So I think that's really interesting, is thinking about doing a lot of reading and research around how you manage that, putting systems in place, but also being really realistic in terms of that. And we've managed for every penny really, really
That's
well. And
really
I think
good.
sometimes I've sort of done that I've taken leadership of that, because I think that's really important that I take responsibility for that, because it's important that organizations viable. And I think the fifth thing is to do your research into it, because I think I had a great conversation with a co-founder of a not-for-profit organization within the healthcare sector. And she had a chat with me. She spent an hour with me online and gave me all of their tips and tricks that they had learned from setting up as, again, an unregistered organization moving into a registered organization. And then we sort of shared joint joint sorts of experiences and things like that. So there's things like when we set up as a community interest company with Companies House in England, there's so much I've still just learned through, for example, doing our first set of accounts that I never even knew that.
Mm,
So when I'd say done something wrong, I was like, oh, I didn't know that was wrong because I haven't necessarily read it fully. So I'd say
mm.
that fifth part is definitely do your research and make the use of those other organisations around you and people who've been through it as well.
Yes. So, and how, because I know you've been doing like in 1 minute, okay? Like, how would you, I know that you do different events. You do face-to-face event, online events, but the face-to-face, because you have a small budget, how do you actually find those locals,
Mm,
especially if you don't have a big budget? So,
yeah.
like, you have like people volunteering in giving up their space, and how does it work?
Yeah, we have a mixture really. So one of the things that people said when we first set up Step Up is they didn't want all the events to just be in schools, because some schools obviously are available at weekends. They wanted some to be outside of that work environment, which is why we only tend to do one event a year in a school. We were quite lucky that we've been able to get either a lower cost venue, or in some cases we've been very lucky in our last year and this year when we did our big conference style event known as our leadership day, that both those schools gifted us the space. And we very much try and build that relationship so that you can get either gifted or discounted spaces. And the same with speakers. So none of our speakers are paid. We always offer and budget to pay for their travel and accommodation to an event. Where they don't want to make use of that, what we then do is that money gets then donated back into the network, and then people ultimately pay for tickets as well. So we try and last year, like I said, because we had quite a lot of funding, we actually spent a lot of that funding on rapidly reducing the cost of our events. So like our coffee morning in Manchester was £5 a ticket, which is an absolute bargain, unlimited tea, coffee,
Yeah.
refreshment for 3 hours. So we were able to do that. This year, we've had to change that and actually increase a little bit more. But actually, we said, you know what, we're still providing something that's really cheap, but you're getting really good quality. And I remember someone, when they came to our London event, they said, I'm not going to use the exact words because you'd need a bleep button, but they said, there's people in my organization who are paid 50, 60 grand a year to organize events like this. And actually, their
Yes.
events are not as good. So this is what an event should be like. And that was really pleasing to hear that, and I totally get where they're coming from. So we sort of have a mixture of different toolkits, but we're not. I think, and this is another tip I'd say, you can't just expect something for nothing in return. So we always try and build that long-term
To
relationship. So
give
like,
back.
yeah, the first organisation that we held our leadership day in London was London Screen Academy, which is a 16 to 19 specialist college for film TV. We met with them beforehand and went around their premises. We met with them just before the event, so about the week before. I then met with them, and all this was in person. We went and made the time and effort to see them, and then we met with them about 6 weeks after, more so about how we're going to continue this relationship further on. So that's really important to us as well, and something I'd definitely say is
To
worth
build.
sharing.
I like that. And so what would be one thing that you could change in education right now, in the educational system, based on all your expertise? What is the one thing that you feel that needs to be changed?
That's a really interesting one. I think a big one is about the accountability and assessment piece, I think, in England. And I think it's been interesting this week that we're recording this week, and it's just been the end of year 6
It
SATs
is.
this week. Even though I'm a year 5 teacher, I actually was released this year to help with administer the year 6 SATs. And I think it's really interesting that when people then start spouting on social media, and obviously there's also secondary exams going on, that actually our assessment system in England is very different to the rest of the world. And actually, if we look at, I went to an event last night at Birmingham City University, and Baroness Mary Bulstead was there, who's the former Joint Secretary of the NEU, and she was talking about how apparently in England tops the international league tables for rote learning, because ultimately we teach a load of knowledge, we expect children and students to regurgitate that after 2 years of study or a couple of years of study. And I think the link between assessment and accountability is really interesting, because I think the accountability systems with Ofsted, actually, you look at the systems in place, they don't work. All of this assessment accountability is more stress on teachers, more stress on children, stress on parents. And actually, I think if we look at other more successful countries around the world, if we look at countries in Scandinavia, we look at places like Singapore, actually, what do they do really well? And looking at different curricula as well. So not just, obviously, I've only got experience of the national curriculum for England and how it works in primary school and been through with GCSEs and A levels. But looking at, for example, like IB, International Baccalaureate curricula, and seeing how different that is, and that is much more of a focus on things like the softer skills, with still a high quality knowledge rich curriculum, but with a real focus on actually how are they just going to be decent human beings. And I think there's not a lot of, within that assessment accountability piece, looking at best practice around the world and being like, right, who's doing it really well? Why don't we learn from it? It's more like, oh, that it's really good there, but we're just going to keep doing the same thing here.
Yeah. So there is no real desire to grow and to change and to transform into something different and taking something new on board. One last thing, Ben, what word of encouragement would you give to any educator, any senior leader, anyone listening to us right now about building their nonprofit organization, or any just word of encouragement? What would you tell them?
I would say the biggest thing is, especially if, like me, you're a single founder, not a co-founder of an organization, is just really look after yourself. Like, there's been times where I felt really burnt out, if I'm honest, and there's times where I've just wanted to throw it all away and quit. And I think it's really important that is fine. And if you do get to that point and do want to do that, that is fine. But really look after yourself and make sure you're still having that time for yourself. Yes, you could keep plowing on and making your organization even better. But ultimately, if it gets to a point where your organization is that reliant on just you, and then you are not well enough to run that organization, then it's a problem. So I'd say look after you and make sure you, when you're planning, like we talked about that 5-step process, when we're planning in that process of how you're going to launch your organization with your organization, make sure that you is a key part of in that plan.
Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today. Anyone listening to us, if you want to get in contact with Ben Hobbis, to get in contact with Step Up Network, I will put the socials on the comments so you could actually get in touch with them. And if you want to get unstuck and achieve your higher calling and you're not clear about what is the next step for you as an educator, is your faith-based educator or senior leader or any education consultant, I would encourage you to join my Wise Edu Speaker Masterclass. I see you next time for the next episode, and make sure that you share, comment, and like the episode today. See you, everyone. Thank you, Ben, again.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and make sure you connect with us on Instagram at The Case for Success. Check also my Linktree and become an affiliate of the Success Guide for Teens Academy, a program that will empower your school community as a parent, teacher, and high school senior leader. Do not hesitate to reach out, comment, and share. Until then, see you in the next episodes.